Hello and welcome to the Alpha, Demo, and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software, and I am pleased to be joined by Dion McCormick, no relation, an Alpha expert extraordinaire. And today, Dion is going to be talking about something that a lot of us have probably heard about, maybe even read a little bit about, but don't know a lot about, and that is GraphQL. So today is going to be an introduction to the subject with some slides and a demo. But we're also going to be here to answer your questions. And Dion is going to return in a few weeks to come up with part 2 of GraphQL. So I think that you will find today's presentation to be very interesting. Again, if you do have questions, type them into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel, or you can send them to guides, GUIDES @alphasoftware.com. Hello, Dion, are you there?
Yes, sir. How you doing today there?
I'm doing great, and I can already see your screen, so we're ahead of the game today.
Oh, good. Yeah, we're on top of this stuff. Well, thank you, everybody. We really appreciate you joining us. It's been a little bit since I've had a chance to talk to everybody, so we really appreciate you taking the time to join us. And as Dave mentioned, this webinar is about you. So it's very important that if you have questions about our subject matter here or on other subjects, feel free to go to the questions area of your GoToWebinar control panel. Put in your questions. Dave will be monitoring. Thank you. And then we'll try to get as many as possible. And if we can't get answers, we try to find out where they are and get them to you there. Also, remember, you can always go to guides@alphasoftware.com, email us, and that will allow us to get some good subject matter. You know, what are people interested? What are they looking for, etc. And we love to get that input because that's a super duper big help for us. So again, we enjoy it. We look forward to your questions, and we're going to dive in a minute. But before I do, I just want to also remind everybody, time is coming. It's Alpha DevCon 2022 in October. Actually, Dave, today my little ones just went to school. Not so little anymore, but they were off to school, just out of the house. So school has started where fall is about here. Football starts in the next week or so. So that means it's Alpha DevCon
like
time.
Around 60, well, 2 months, October 18th. Today's the 17th of August. It's coming right up.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's going to be, I'm super excited. It's like early Christmas is the way I kind of view it there. So, and also the other thing, I'm really hoping that I live in Texas and it goes below 100 before October 18th is my goal. You know, it's just like I can have a hope and a dream. It's been miserable. So I'm like, anytime it gets close to fall, everybody in Texas is like, please sooner. So anyway, you can go to this, hit the register button, get registered, and you will be off to the races. And we have an amazing event. Great content. It's all going to be recorded in high definition and available posts, so you can use it as your own resource library. And also, more importantly, if you miss part of it, because it is a 4-day event, you'll be able to jump on and make sure you see every element of it. So I'm pumped. I'm super excited, and we can't wait to see you there. So go ahead, and if you haven't registered, go ahead and click the register button and go off from there. So that's great. So I don't have any other announcements, Dave, unless you have anything else coming up or anything of interest?
That'll do it. Let's dive in. We want to see this GraphQL stuff.
You got it. Okay, so today we're going to talk about GraphQL, and I'm going to set expectations. This is a little bit more geekier, a little bit more code-oriented, but it's incredibly powerful. And as usual, Alpha has made it very simple to do this. Normally, building GraphQL interfaces for APIs is very complex because there is a lot going on underneath the covers. But again, Alpha has done all the hard work, actually made an enormous amount of progress in terms of the basic capability, but more importantly, tools to help you get up to speed on GraphQL and use these other pieces. So what I want to do first is kind of go into a little bit of history, give you a little background, talk about what is it, why is it important, and more important, then go into a demonstration and show you how easy it is to take advantage of this technology, which is extremely powerful and in the industry is becoming more and more of a dominant methodology for deploying complex systems, especially complex systems built on top of databases. So we'll go through, and again, as I go through, if you have questions, please take the time to go to your GoToWebinar control panel, put your questions in there, and we'll take some pauses in between just to make sure we're covering it, because it is a little bit more of a complex subject, and we want to make sure that you come away with a good understanding. You may not use it near term, but you'll know what it is, you'll know why you would use it, so if you have the opportunity in the future. So first, I'm going to have this very dry. GraphQL is a query language for APIs, not a database, but for APIs, and also a runtime for fulfilling those queries with existing data. So it's a new way for you to talk through APIs. And it is very powerful, and it's really come together, and a lot more people are using it. And you'll see many, and I'll show you a couple examples of what we're talking about there. So what is the background? Well, first, it was developed actually internally at what was known as Facebook, now Meta, in 2012. So we're talking, a decade ago. It's been very out there. And then they actually open sourced it to what's called the GraphQL Foundation in 2015, and it's been supported there. So the nice thing about this is that it's an open source technology that we can take advantage of, and also you can. So you don't have to worry about, a company just deciding you can't use it anymore. It is available and supported. And because it also went open source, the enormous amount of companies are using it, supporting it, and leveraging it to make their lives easier, and more importantly, make it easier for the people who are building these kind of systems. So, why was it built? Well, and I'm gonna come back to this in a moment, but the bottom line is that this allowed for Facebook, they were building an app that was pulling a lot of data back from their back-end systems to present the timeline, the feed, all the other social media aspects that are on a Meta application or Facebook application. And they felt when they first built it, they realized there were an enormous amount of data coming down, and there was a whole bunch of API calls they were having to do to basically pull that data. And so it was increasing their resource requirements for their servers and stuff. And when you realize how fast they were growing and what kind of user base, even incremental improvements in the amount of data or calls will reduce the needs for resources in the back end. So this became very important to them, and a very important tool that allowed them to provide a bunch of capabilities to their developers, and more importantly is reduce server and application traffic. So overall, they got a better economics of scale because they didn't have to buy as many servers and as many network environments and data centers. Even though they bought a ton, if they hadn't gone down this road, they would have bought a lot more than they did. So let's talk about the background. Okay, so I think everybody in this call understands what a REST API is. It's basically an alpha. We've done a number of different series on it. Alpha has very powerful tools that allow you to create APIs and publish them on your alpha to allow people to interact securely, safely with your application and your application data. But if you look on the left-hand side, it's basically there is a request that comes from the client, whether it's a web browser, a mobile phone, or another server. Basically, you say, hey, give me some person data, and then it comes back with a set of data. And so that's the concept of how REST API works. So you basically have an API where you call that API, it then returns some information to you. So for instance, give me user ID number 1, here it gives you the name on that, and then maybe the address. So if you wanted the user information, you call this. So if I wanted to get both the user and also the customer address information, I'd have to make 2 calls to get that data. And so even in the situation where you're making a single call, just say, give me everything you know about this person, you still are pulling a lot of data. Let's say all you want to do is on your screen, you want to show their first name and last name. Well, sorry, you're going to have to take and receive all this information. Then you can extract out of that the information. And this is fine if you have small data sets, but when things get more complicated, when you have multi-tiered data, it starts getting more and more complicated over time. And so you can see you start getting into these very complex, multi-calls just to get a set of information. You either give everything at one level or you have them make multiple calls. And I was actually on a project where we originally, and before we used GraphQL, basically what happened was we had to make like 10 calls to get all the information we needed to show on the screen, because it was about a customer and they had this information, and those were in different tables and everything else. And so you had these 10 calls that were needed to make, and it was just a nightmare for the developer. They had to go through all those calls. So we said, okay, wait, what we're going to do is we're going to create a meta call. And then, so our brainstorm was we would make a call, but then behind the scenes, we would collect all this data and artificially create this master record with all this data. And it did work. The problem we had is those payloads started getting larger and larger. And again, we didn't need everything every time you called that. We maybe needed a subset of data. So we ended up doing a lot of tuning, creating separate special requests, kind of basically polluting our REST API to get to what we could do and get the performance we want. Again, it worked great, fabulous effort, but again, it was a lot more work. Whereas if we had GraphQL at that time, it would have made simple. So how does GraphQL work? Let's see, which one do I show this? Okay, let me go here. This is the best way to show it. So instead of making a single call, you make a query, and you'll see over here, and we're going to show you some examples on it. And you basically say, okay, it's like SQL. You know, you'd say select, for like example, let's look over here at this right here, where it says person, first name, last name. If I were doing it in SQL, I'd say select first name, comma, last name from person. Let's say that's the table. And that's it. Like, you know, where X is equal Y, you know, where customer ID equals 1. So what's nice about this is it's like SQL, and that's why it's called GraphQL, because it's a query language. So instead of S, it's graph. And the reason it's called graph is because that's what our friends at Facebook were doing. They built these social graphs of people with all this data. Excuse me. So what this does, which is really cool, is like, let's look at this situation. So if I wanted to get the first name and last name, I'd make this call, get this whole payload back, and then I'd extract first name, last name, and then show it on the screen. Well, with GraphQL, instead of sending this, I send this body in a post request, and I say for person, give me the first name and last name, and it says, oh, okay, here's your data back. Here's person, first name, last name. It doesn't give me email, relationship status, middle name, etc. And what's really cool about GraphQL is that this could be like you can do basically think of them as joins, where you can have give me person and their orders, or give me person and their addresses. And so instead of doing a person call, then calling the address API, I can basically wrap it into a single call that will say, give me the person with this information. And by the way, give me all their orders with this subset of data. And it would give you back basically a JSON package that had just the information you want. So now instead of having to go through and pull all their orders and all the data and go through there, we now have fewer calls going on, and more importantly, less data going back, which means the API call is faster, the server is working less, and it works really well from there. So as you can see, here's a graphical example of what that is. So let's say I had a client and I wanted to get all the information about, let's say, a sports thing. So I'd get a list of teams, I'd get a list of matches, I'd get a list of players, I'd gather that data together, and then in the client, I would display that. Whereas GraphQL, I say, hey, make one call, give me the players, teams, and matches information. This goes out, grabs the data I need, and returns it as a single package. So now, instead of doing 3 calls, I do 1 call, but I get the exact same data. In fact, I get less data because I'm not having to go through and grab all the data that these default bring back to them. So that's the heart of GraphQL, single call a data. Now, the challenge is that you can see, if I go back here, this is a pretty simple call. You just say, blah, 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 and here's the data that comes back. Well, with this, you kind of have to learn what's called the GraphQL language. Luckily, there is a bajillion training classes. There's tools. You'll actually see Alpha has some built-in tools to make your life easier. And the reality is, once you get the hang of it, it's pretty straightforward. And it's also, you'll see when I do the Alpha demonstration, there's actually these tools that allow you to kind of play with it, to learn it. And so you don't have to just know it. You can actually kind of fumble your way through doing it there. So that's the only downside. You kind of have to learn a new thing, but it's really not too hard when it's all said and done. And again, Alpha gives you a lot of tools from there. And as I mentioned, there is a ton of resources out there. Actually, first and foremost is that there is the GraphQL org, which is, let me put this in the chat window here, is basically the community. It gives you the history, background, it has training materials, etc. Really cool stuff. So you can see, like, for instance, here someone's making a call. They want the hero name. Oh, now I want to make a call and I also want to get their height. Oh, I also want to make a call and get their mass, I get them all at the same time. So there's a lot of training on here. There's the documentation, there's all the detail. And again, really, you don't need to know much about how it works. You just need to know how to build those GraphQL queries, basically this part, and you're going to be golden. Alpha does all the heavy lifting for you as far as building your GraphQL backend. You'll see in a few minutes, and all those pieces there. But also there's classes on Udemy. There's tons of YouTube free content you can go on. So what's nice is you don't have to worry about doing, it is a touch arcane, especially for someone who comes from SQL. It's a little different. I wish they had just used SQL, but hey, that's how it goes. But this actually in the end turns out to be a little simpler even than that once you get the hang of it. But you're never going to get stuck. There's tons of resources, there's tons of people, tons of training, tons of capability for you to do that. So with that said, before I dive into the demo, which I think will be more interesting than me yammering along, any quick questions or comments or anything so far, Dave? And also just
no questions so far.
Okay, I have bored them into submission.
Oh, I don't know. I think they're excited for you to get started with the.
I know, it's like cut to the chase, pal. And also, Sarah, thank you for joining us. Sarah will correct all of my failures on this event.
I'm sorry, I didn't introduce Sarah because I didn't see her at the beginning of it, but joining us today, of course, is Sarah Mitchell, our Director of Customer Success, in charge of our documentation department. So.
And she has a full-time job cleaning up my messes. Really, when I'm on these webinars, like going, no, Dean, wrong again. I can't tell you how many times I've been written up. I don't know. It's just it's not employee of the month. It's employee, demerits of the month. Keep winning that there. Okay, let's get into this here. Okay, so I'm in alpha in the development environment, and let's do a little housekeeping first. I have taken the opportunity to create my alpha demo Northwind. So I have a data set. In this case, it's a little SQLite database that's underneath this application that I'm using there. If I wanted to explore this, you'll see, and I'm sure you've seen it before, you've got your tables, your employees, orders, products, customers, et cetera, went there. And again, Alpha developed all that and built that in, so I'm going to use that from there. Okay, so your first step is to, we've gone through and developed what are called web services. The idea is there is an endpoint that you will deploy on your Alpha Anywhere server, whether that's standalone or is hosted, or more importantly, is on Alpha Cloud, which is a great environment for this because there's so many optimizations that happen in the AWS environment on Alpha Cloud. It just makes things fly. It's amazing how fast things go. So what we need to do is create what's called an endpoint that will be called from the outside world. Things like, for instance, let's say I created a mobile app. I'm going to call this endpoint. Let's say I created a web app, etc. But bottom line is, think of this as a endpoint that will take your incoming requests, munge them, grab the data you want, and return them from there. So I'm going to go to web services, and I'm going to click create new. So you can do that either right-clicking on web service here, or go up here. I think you'll file new. So you're right here. You click new here. Now, as we've had before, there are different web services, and we've covered these up here. SOAP, REST, and we've done mainly that, but you'll see there's an area down here called GraphQL. And it says create a new definition to create a GraphQL service. So classic Alpha, it's going to walk you through it. It's going to make sure you do it right. It'll allow you to experiment, and you can always redo it in a matter of minutes because this stuff is super simple. So I'm going to create a new definition to create my GraphQL service. Okay. And now hold on one second. I want to get up this other page right here. There we go. My cheat sheet, just so I don't screw anything up here. Okay. So you're presented with this and you're like, oh, code, oh no, code. Don't worry. If you were a GraphQL person, you could literally type away in there. This is basically what's called the definition file. It basically says to GraphQL what data is available for people to go on there. Now, again, it's code, so it generates this, and this is industry standard. And if you were like a glutton for punishment, you could go over to where, oh, it's on this one. You could go here, and they have documents on how to create that, but you don't have to. Basically, if you'll notice down here, I have connection string. We're going to use a demo Northwind. So much like any kind of example we're doing, we first use tell it which connection string we want to use. Notice that it's already filled that in for me. So basically, as we go through this process, it's going to fill this out. And I'm only going to touch on this. As you can see, there's tons of stuff down here. Reality is I'm only kind of going to touch into this first because I don't want to get crazy and go through there. So as we make these selections, as we do things, it will build all this information for me, which is the industry standard representation. So step one, again, is change the connection string. And if you had multiple connection strings, you can attach it to any connection string you want. And it puts in a classic Alpha Anywhere connection screen. Now I need to pick the tables. And I can have one or more tables. I'm going to start simple. So you'll notice that it inspected my database and basically gave me what tables I have available from that standpoint here. And there's ways to add custom view, again, a little bit more later. But let's say I want to get customer data. So I'm just going to click here and select customer. And then after I've done that, I'm going to click Save. Okay, so it's filled this in. Basically, it's a table, gives the name, all this information, tells what it could do. And again, this is out of the box just for you playing with it. All of this is customizable. Like if you don't want someone to be able to delete it, you can go in here and change that to false, and it will not allow you through this interface to delete it, which is a good thing, by the way, from that standpoint there. But you'll notice it did two things. One is it's sort of got the customer header table. It tells the table name, etc., how it's going to work, and it gives it what's called a plural, which is how we're going to refer to it in the API, and an actual name. But you'll notice also that it's done something very interesting. It's actually gone in and looked at all the potential fields that are in that table and picked them out and added them to this query, meaning customer ID. It's a string type. Let's see if there's any other different type. Most of these are almost all string. But it's got some other interesting, the cursor, this is how you actually navigate through it, i.e. Cursor is the name of the field. And again, don't worry about this stuff. It's very interesting. You can read more about it later. But Alpha is basically building all this definition stuff for me, so I don't have to worry about it. Now, the cool thing is once it's built, I can go in and tweak it, and everything goes from there. Now, there's a bunch of other things you can do, authorization, user defined, etc. But I'm going to leave it for this demo as just out of the box. That's what I want to do from there. So I'll click Save. Now it's going to ask me there. So I'm just going to go ahead and say customer GraphQL, GQL, and it creates it as a service. That is much like how we do with the A5 with the REST service. So it's a type of REST service. Basically think of it as a REST service, but on steroids, and it does a lot of stuff for you. Okay, so you'll notice now you have a new REST service in there. This is the one I used for my demo prep. And then you'll see there's a little icon that looks like the GraphQL icon. So I can double click on that and reopen this and make modifications. I could add more tables, so it's mutable, meaning that it basically you can keep enhancing it, changing it, you can make copies of it, etc. from there. And in our advanced course next, and it's really not advanced, we're going to touch on some of these other really interesting capabilities so I can kind of teach you a little bit more of how powerful this can be. But I'm just going to leave that as it goes from there. So I'm ready. I'm done. I have done my work. I have a service that is available. But like, how does it work? And that's what we're going to talk about now. And we'll talk about deployment of this service also. So when I'm in here, I'm going to right click on the service here. So I'm going to right click on there. And you'll notice there's a new little drop-down item called Test API with GraphQL. And GraphQL is basically a user interface that allows you, much like, think of it as a SQL console where you can write little SQL commands. This is the exact same thing. And we can do it either live, which would publish it and do it, or working preview, whichever one you want. But we're going to use working preview for this. Okay, so it brings up, this is called basically, think of this as your console for doing those kind of queries. And what's really nice is this has a lot of cool built-in features, and you're going to see this. This is really fun and very, very cool. So you'll see over here is this little area, which is where we're going to define our calls or our payload. And if you don't mind, let me go back here. This is what we're going to generate right here, is essentially the equivalent of this, which will return the data here. So instead of doing all this and doing everything, all we have to do is write that little thing. Now, once I have that written, I can then just use any API like Postman. We'll show that next time where you can actually use Postman to test it out and play with it outside of the system once you've published it. It's pretty cool. But how do you write this? I mean, if you're new, it's kind of a pain in the tail. You don't know what all the pieces are, what they mean. So this gives you a great environment for you to play. So you'll notice I can start typing in here and check this out. It also has what is called auto completion built into it from that standpoint. So this actually has, and as you get more experience, this helps you write that. So you'll notice something called get customer. It's like, well, Dean, you never wrote get customer or get many customers. No problem. That's part of GraphQL. When I created, and let me jump back real quick and open this up, you'll see that I have customer and customers plural. So what it did is it wrote two things for me called get customer and get customers. I didn't have to do that. That's the cool thing. It does all that work for me, so I don't have to do it. So when I'm in here and I start typing, it actually auto-completes. I say, oh, get customer. Then I open up parentheses, and this is, you'll get to know this once you know the, and there's great documentation on the Alpha website also on this. I can say, you know what? I want to get a single customer, and I want to specify that customer ID. So I'll go, okay, I'll take customer ID, colon. Now, normally you'd think, and this I screwed up, equals. Well, remember, we're in JSON land. So it's actually, everything is around JSON and REST. So we don't actually use equals or stuff like that. We say alf key. So I'm saying, go get a customer and match me customer ID alf key. Voila. Check that out. If you'll notice, and it did all this auto completion for me, it did something smart for me because I have to tell it here what data I want to come back. Well, it was smart enough to basically fill that in for me. So what it does, this says, get a single customer. This says, well, the customer I want is key alf key, and that could be unique ID, whatever in your table it is. And then in this little bracket here, you'll notice is a list of items that say, what is the data that's going to come back? And that's where the power is really at. So when I hit play, it immediately runs that and gives me the results here. So I can see immediately. And guess what? I now know what the data is going to come back. So I can use that in XBasic and in JavaScript and wherever I want to kind of do those pieces from here. So let's say I don't want all this data. I'm going to go ahead and do something like this. I'm just going to delete this and hit play. Voila. Notice that I did the get customer, but it only brought back two fields. Again, you're starting to see now where instead of me writing these very complex expressions, I'm basically saying, give me a customer. I want that customer alf key. Oh, I want blonde P. Let's go blonde P and do it. There you go. I'm going to give you blonde P. Oh, and here is the data I want back from here. I can change that. And I think one's contact name. So let's see. Oh, notice, check this out. This is so cool. Since it knows what records are available through the get customer API, I don't even have to remember. I go, oh, you know what? Let me, let's get the postal code. Yep, there's 6,700. And then maybe I want another one. Let's say I want their city and city. And it writes all this for me. You notice I'm done. I can do this. And now I have something simple. And we're not going to do it today, but if you want to do that multi-level where you get customers and orders, you can do that right in here and set that all up so you get from there. Now, a couple things that are kind of nice. You can use Prettify. That basically pretties up your code to make it look a little nicer. You notice it put in the separations and everything else. So as you hack along and do it, you can make it pretty, which is really handy. And here's another thing I really like. Basically, I can copy this out. Oh, before I go in that, check this out, built-in documentation. So you can go right here, click here, and we have a bunch of off-the-shelf documentation. There is more extensive documentation online, but we're available from there. But you can actually, one of the coolest features I found was this history. If I click on there, it actually is recording all of the previous things we were doing. So you can go back to this one, or let's say that one, run that. Oh, I want to go back here and run that. So what's great is often you'll like be trying out some stuff and you go, ooh, I screwed up. So you want to go back and look at your history and check this out. I can click, I think I can favorite this one. oh, I can say, you know what, this one, let's see, let's call this one Blondp worked. Okay. Oh, maybe in it, let's see, did I put it over the side? I'll have to check, that might be an issue. But it gives you the ability to go back and say, oh, I want that one, I want this one. Like, let's go back to the original one, boom. Then you say, I want to start from there. So the neat thing about that is often when you're developing, you're kind of moving your way through it and doing it very quickly. Oh, it does, it just needed to refresh this. So now I can go back to Blondp work and I have that one ready to go. So some very, very cool tools. Now, I believe when I exit out of here, this gets erased. I will check that in a few minutes. But then you can sit there and you just have to grab this, copy it, put it on your clipboard, and then you can just go to Notepad, go in here, and then whenever you need it, you can copy it, go right into here to do some testing and modify it, and off to the races from there. And again, you can prettyfy it and see the history of those pieces here. So this is the GraphQL interface. This allows you to experiment and play with the graph, and you don't have, that way you have built-in docs, you can play with it. It has autocomplete, so when you want to do something interesting, I did that wrong. Let's say facts, or I can do anything I want. You just kind of go down here. Let's say we want contact name and run it, pretty it up, save it, I'm good to go. And often what you're doing is when you're doing your application, you kind of know what you want on the API. So you kind of build these API calls, and then we'll show you next time how you can reuse them in your application in many different ways, which is very, very cool, and many ways to do that. But very powerful concept here. Now, a couple quick other things, and then I would like to open it up for, let's test this out, really. Let's see what happens here. Working preview, history. Oh, it does remember, never mind. They're smarter than me. And you notice it saved these, I guess it's just a refresh issue, but it saved these two up at top. So when I click a save one, I think what it does is then when I go to history, or let me exit out, it could be just when it gets refreshed. Yeah, it saves these as favorites, so you know which ones are favorites, and it's saving that for this. So it's kind of nice, much better than I thought. So hadn't played with that before. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to show you is real quick, you can also test this with live. And what you can do, which is really cool, is we can actually create a GraphQL API test page. And again, we'll go through some of these other things later, but let me go ahead and do that. And I'm going to create this page. Let me go through a little slower, sorry. You click this button right down here. So again, I edited this. I click create graph API page, and I'll go API test, call it anything you want. And this is handy if you're developing, working with other developers. Okay. Let me go here to A5W pages. It's created there. Turn on my development server. Dun, 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 dun. It's going to publish everything for me. And here we go. And basically, you see, it's basically the same thing, but instead of them having to be inside the alpha developer, it actually does this. So let's go ahead and do this real quick. Let's see if this works. I'm flying a little blind here. Yeah, something about the definition file. So I must have not, I'll have to check on that. All that answer the next time around. But bottom line is that this mimics that inbuilt or built-in testing interface. So you can actually put this up on your website, maybe in a very secure way, and then developers can be running GraphQL against it without having to actually do it in Postman or things like that. It's really a handy little tool. And I've used it on the REST APIs, which creates standard REST APIs. So this is sort of similar in terms of the open API structure, a standard tool that people use to learn, to test, to identify how they want to use your interface. And again, next time we'll go into a little bit more detail on that. But the nice thing, it's very straightforward. And again, there's the built-in tools and testing and capabilities. So I'll take a moment here and take a rest for a moment, or actually open it up for questions and see what kind of questions people have.
We do have questions, although not surprisingly.
Awesome.
So let's start right up at the very beginning. And the first one was when you were setting up the data source, can you choose multiple connection strings to define a GraphQL thing, or is it just one connection string?
My guess is one, because if
Yep.
we look at the definition here, but I could be wrong. I mean, but I think our implementation, it's expecting one, but maybe you can add more, but my guess at this point would be one connection string. But then you could
Okay.
just create another connection string, or another API endpoint for that other connection string, and then publish it there. So you may have to have two API endpoints, GraphQL endpoints for that.
And can you get multiple schemas or multiple tables in this case?
Yeah,
If
actually, let me go ahead and just show you that real quick.
Okay.
I can just
Yep.
say we also want, let's just just grab some simple category.
Okay.
Okay, so you'll notice now there's category fields, but then it's also built customer. So
Neat.
let's save it.
These are two things
then-
that don't typically relate to each other. They relate to other records.
Yep.
Oh, neat. So in one.
So now you'll notice I went back in here and
Yep.
I've got two things. I can get category or I can get categories, and it's just linked to those tables there. We'll talk next time around of hierarchical data, how that
Yep.
works, which is extremely powerful. That's really where you start getting into the full power, because you make one call and go through a whole, basically think of it as a join table set in very, but I can get category and then all that. So it works the exact same way, but it's built all that stuff for me, which is really handy and nice.
Nice. All right. The next question. This is more of a definitely a GraphQL question, which is when it was setting up the definition for you and it was defining the types of fields, there were some people with eagle eyes spotted that some were marked as string and some were marked as string exclamation point. I was just wondering if you happen to know what the difference is between
That's
those
a
two.
good point. Yeah. Oh, look, there's a double. Yep, this one's string.
Exclamation, and that one is regular. Yeah.
Let's do this real quick. It means the field's non-nullable. Let's go down
Okay.
here.
Yep.
Yeah. See, the string
Must have
says
a
it's one of the
value.
built-in ones, but this
Yep.
is not mean that promise to always give you a value when you query this field. So anytime you put an exclamation point, it's basically telling it's not nullable. It's going to give you something back.
Okay, great.
So it is following along the SQL concepts.
This one, not entirely GraphQL, but kind of related. Is there a way to get AA to use Alpha Anywhere to use Visual Studio Code as a third-party editor for things like JavaScript, HTML, or CSS?
I've copied stuff over and put it into an edit and then copied it back, but
Okay.
I don't know of any way to actually say when you open up this editor, we're using what's called the Monaco editor, which is from Microsoft. So we're using some of those, but you don't have all the extensions and all the other code completion stuff that Visual Code may have. So the answer is, I'm not aware of any way to say use that. It'd be kind of cool, but I'm not sure the capabilities of that.
Okay, thank you. Next question. The examples that you've been giving have been using a query where you're pulling back a single record. Is it possible to get back all of the records?
Very good point. Okay, so let me go ahead and go into the test here. So you also notice when I'm starting there, I can also do get many customers, and that gets many customers from there. And you can actually identify which customers you want on that. And I'm trying to look up. I actually tried that where it gave me all the customers. Bear with me. Let me see if I can find my notes on this. It's down a little bit farther. Yeah, so you can do something like, if I'm not mistaken, first let me go ahead and put in some data I want back. I'll go, it's going to be customer ID. Okay, so, oh, there's a little different, I'm sorry, and I apologize. This is where it helping me out. Okay, So we have get many customers, but then you have to say for each records, you have to then put in another level where you say customer ID and country. So basically the idea is it's got a little different nomenclature.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have to put in here, I think we put in there first 10, let's see if that works. Let me see, I think it needs a, yeah, okay.
Okay.
So you're seeing, and again, I apologize everybody. I wish I could say I was a GraphQL monster, but I'm not. But this allows you, you know, like, there you go. So it brought it back all the customers. And there's probably a way to say, give me everything. I just don't know. Now,
or you could obviously set it in ridiculously high. One of the
yeah,
other.
now let's say you had 1 million people in your database. Well, if you're on an API and you're on a mobile phone, you may not want to bring back 1 million records. Right. So you can do fun stuff like this, where I want the first 3. Okay, so let's do that. Brings those. But then I can put in here, I can say, for instance, skip 3. Notice it's giving me the next 3.
The next 3.
So it uses that paging concept. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, that's terrific. Yeah, wonderful. But instead of page sizes, it's actual record counts. So the math is
exactly. Yeah. Yep. So I can say, give me the first 10, first showing on my screen. And then like this would be the second 10. This would be, you know, skip 0 would say that. So when I build my API call, I can say, well, give me page 3 or whatever that, or give me these sets of records based on what's being displayed. And it does all that for you. And again, the nice thing is now you can say, oh, you know what? We also need their postal code and we need their phone. So now I've edited this and off to the races. I don't pull back all the data. So already I'm ahead of the game in terms of I'm reducing my sort of payload size. So it's easier on the server and much faster in terms of delivery to the actual end device that goes from there. Great question. Thank you for that. So again, when it builds it, it creates what's called get customer. And then you notice why it said plural, get many. And it does that for each of the different entities that are inside there. There's things like, you know, in this tape, I've got customers, but I've got categories, but it could be companies, whatever it happens to be from there. And again, next time we'll cover the hierarchical data where you can say, give me their customers and give me their orders or things along those lines, which is even more powerful.
And that, what you just said there, relates to another question, which is, so can you basically do any type of SQL query? Can you do complex joins and things like that with GraphQL?
I'm going to say, I wouldn't say any, but I'd say most of what you can do, it's built for doing hierarchical kind of complex thing there. I just know, I don't know what the limits are on the join technology. Again, you know, this came from the Meta Facebook land, which was, I'm a user with all these friends and these friends are connected to friends. So I know there's capabilities to do cross-join kind of capabilities, but we'd have to, you know, again, it would explain a little bit more on their website, how you could do more complex kind of schema characters and stuff like that. And so you can do this, like you'll notice in here, name and appears in. Well, we're not writing, and appears in is like another table. So it gives you this information here. So it's, these are called schemas like SQL, so you can do all those things. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff we'll cover very briefly, but there's things called migrations and mutations. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do it from within there. But again, kind of don't want to get too crazy out of the gate.
Okay. Mutation sounds scary. I like it.
I do. I love it. You know. Well, again, it's someone who had COVID and has a surprise need to eat brains. So
excellent. So now we have 2 people with very similar questions, actually maybe 3 here, and that is, this is all great, but how do I actually use it in Alpha anywhere? Like, can I use this data to populate a UX or you know, a view box or something?
And that we'll cover next time. Yeah, no, that's would be next of how to consume
this. Stay tuned for that one. Yeah. Okay, cool. So
now that's remember Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, primarily, you know, Alpha's tool is built to take care of a lot of that. I mean, automatically select the data, put it in, et cetera. But again, people are moving to an API-centric design where even our own UXs and stuff goes through an API. So we will touch on that for sure. But where this becomes very, very powerful is, let's say you have built a system on Alpha, and it's a customer management system or a manufacturing system. And what you want to do is securely offer to that company's customers, people who are not using Alpha, to consume and interact with that data. So much like putting up together REST API, this is just a more sophisticated example. So now you can set that up, and then someone can then use REST API just to pull the data they want, and in a secure fashion. You can really, there's a lot of security elements that go into it to make sure people can do certain things there. An example which we were playing with, to be honest, is a great one. Let's see, there we go. But Monday.com, you guys might have heard of Monday.com. It's kind of a online project management, task management. They're doing really, really well out there. So they do all this stuff. They have a very powerful interface, but they realize that not everybody can do everything within it. So what they did is they created a basically a GraphQL on top of it. And this is some stuff so this doesn't really make sense right now. I haven't given it its API token yet, but basically they actually allow you to go in and let's go here. Go back here. Basically, instead of them writing a ton of APIs, they basically just put together and this is actually a pretty good introduction, but they have the same thing where you have a query, you get their boards, you can get the items on it, you can create items, etc. And so it made their life easier, because if they start modifying and enhancing their system, they don't have to create a whole bunch of new API endpoints. They basically say now it's exposed to GraphQL. And for instance, they have things called boards, which is like your board of data there. And so this is their query. Boards, give me the ID of the board. Here's the data I want from it. And here are the items that are underneath it. And so major companies are using GraphQL. So I'd say initially, your real use would be if you wanted to go ahead and expose your data in a secure fashion on one of your applications. GraphQL is kind of a more modern way. You could absolutely build APIs for it, but GraphQL actually helps it out. And again, with GraphQL, they can actually show you what the curl and what JavaScript would look like on that. It's well supported. And if you go into something like Postman, but we will touch on how we can use it internally with Alpha to leverage this technology. So we'll make sure to touch on that, so you can see how you can actually eat your own dog food in terms of creating this API and then reusing it internally in your application. But often the reality is most people are building this to then give to outside people to allow them a very simple way for them to call in and get the information. It's just a more advanced way to do that. And it also has a very, very strong community training. And there are other companies that are using it. So it's like a fish to water. They just understand what they could do and what they can do with it.
Excellent. Another question. We've been doing everything here, working preview locally and stuff like that. But when it comes to security, how does that work? Is there like API keys or something, or how?
Yeah, we'll cover that again. I want to touch base on it next time. You got to tune in. I got to go from there. But you'll see here. Oh, sorry.
Everyone's jumping ahead. I love this.
Yeah. And by the way, feel free to go in and play with it. I mean, it's in the pre-release, so you're welcome.
And that was in fact my next question. It's in the pre-release, but is it still just a pre-release feature at this point, or is it in an official?
That's a question. I've been using the developer edition. Actually, mine's a little dated. It's almost a month old. I think it was in the last. I'm not sure. I'd have to go check the release notes, but I know it's
a newish.
Might have been in the last production release.
So it may have been in the last one, but if not, it's currently in the pre-release. Okay.
Yep. So we'll touch on that. But basically, when you have this, you can click authorization, has authorization, and then you can select either Node or XBasic. And so we'll run through that really quick, and it will show you, how that works and how the method is coded. This is very similar if you've done anything with the REST API. When you're doing REST APIs, it has a very simple where basically you have an XBasic function or a Node function, but really mainly XBasic, where it takes whatever you submitted like a token and you compare it, and then you say yay or nay as far as where they go. So we'll cover that for sure.
Gotcha. Wonderful. Let's see what else we've got here. I think we've hit all the GraphQL ones. We have an unusual one, but maybe you know the answer here. And it has to do with, do you know of any XBasic functions that would let you get Often with the next basic function, you can use it to read information about a file, for example. You can get the file size, when it was modified, access control, things like that. But do you know of a function which could give you back the version number for an exe or for a DLL file?
No,
Neither.
I've never done anything like that. Kind of
I did a
understand what that
quick
would
poke
be.
around for that answer, and it looks like you can do it in C, which means you would do a little C assembly that you would call as in using .NET. But I
Yeah,
don't
the
think
other
there's
is,
anything
can
in it
you
for next
issue a
basic.
command? Like, is there some kind of, because with alpha, there's a function in there, which is very powerful. I'll go here and go to my, it's here. I had it open somewhere. I always have it open for sure, but it's command. You can do shell. Yeah, that's it, shell. Which is kind of very powerful because it basically allows you to, where is that? It's shell. No, it's not shell. But basically, you can emit anything to the operating
Oh
system,
yeah,
and then
system
it.
shell. So this is definitely not
Yeah.
web server stuff here, though. We're not web safe.
Well,
This
you
is
can run it on your web server, but no
okay.
guarantees on what happens on that stuff. But
Yeah.
you can run functions on there like sysshell. And what it does, you can basically give it any kind of regular DOS command or whatever it happens to be, and it will return that information back into it. So you can say, and so therefore, if there's a way in DOS to do it,
Yep.
yep, you're able to do it from there. And that's kind of my final place to go if I need something kind of funky on that stuff.
Sounds good. Excellent. So that looks like it for questions. Dion, thank you very much for presenting today.
Thank you, everybody.
And just to let everyone know, we will have a special guest next week as well. Lee Vasic will be joining us, and he's going to be showing you ways that he's using images to represent data and to not only represent data, but actually change values of data in UX controls. It's really very cool. He demonstrated it for me about a month ago, and it will be shown to you next Wednesday. So Dion, thank you again. Sarah, thanks very much for joining us, and thanks
My
all
pleasure.
of you. Hope to see you at our next Wednesday webinar. Until then, take care and stay well. Bye-bye.